Welcome. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're all good. I have to tell you, I really look forward to these new AE sessions because it gets Renee and I to start thinking about our basics, right? And what it is as you as new AEs need to know when you talk about multiple listing. I understand most of you, if not all of you, are probably 2 years into your position, so congratulations. Also understand that some of you may have taken the position during the pandemic. Hats off to you. I don't know what that's like at all, but hopefully you're doing okay and surviving. It's a strange world that we're in, but we're really fortunate to be able to reach you remotely and to participate in sessions like this and to just still have our conference, right? I staff the NAR Multiple Listing Committee, and we're still conducting very important work of that group, even though we're all locked down and NAR's offices are closed right now. So I hope you're all safe and comfortable and well. I want you to know from Renee and myself, this is a very open and open discussion opportunity for you to ask questions, make comments. So please, you don't have to wait till the end. If you have something to say, raise your hand if you want to. Do it either on your video or do it in the electronic raise your hand and we'll address whatever it is you want to say. The purpose of today's session is to really kind of talk about things that you as new AEs should know when it comes to multiple listing service. Some of you may have the benefit of having been with the organization prior to your current position, and that's great. For those of you that don't, it may seem like a foreign language, something different. While it's an important tool for your brokerage community, understanding the ins and outs and everything else can be daunting at times. So Renee is a seasoned professional from the California area. I've been with NAR coming up on almost 30 years now. I'm the director of engagement, and I'm also the staff executive for NAR's Multiple Listing Issues and Policy Committee, and another group called the MLS Technology and Emerging Issues Advisory Board. And I'll talk about those two committees more in a second. But that's who I am. I live in Chicago. I have 2 teenagers who are doing high school work from their bedrooms on the other side of the house. My wife is a school teacher of 4th and 5th graders who has taken over our dining room, has a whiteboard behind her. And I get the highlight of my day is when I go downstairs to get a snack or a drink, I get to listen to hear her interact with 4th and 5th graders. And if you've not had that experience, oh my God, it's a whole different world than the stuff we're dealing with. And I just love it. I have a whole new respect for teachers in general. But that's a little bit about me. Renee, I'll turn it over to you. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Rodney. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rene Galicia. I'm the director of MLS Engagement here at NAR. I've been here for about 2 of Rodney's 30 years. Prior to coming to NAR, I worked at California Regional MLS. My last position there was as Director of Compliance and Data Licensing. So I worked in the MLS world for about 8 years before making a stopover in Virginia to work out of the DC office. And now I work remotely out of Knoxville, Tennessee. So we have a lot of great information for you today. As we go, as Rodney mentioned, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask a question or drop a question in the chat box. We're here for you today. So we have some topics that we'll use to navigate our time together this morning, but we want to answer any and all of your questions. During the presentation, I'll also drop a couple links in the chat box for your reference, but don't worry if you missed something, we'll have those emailed out to you after the meeting. So with that, let's go ahead and get into our content here. If I can get the slides going. All right.
So policy process. So in the AE sessions, and I assume all of you attended the initial AE session, we kind of talk about basics, right? Why is policy important? It's a condition for insurance coverage from the National Association of Realtors. And we talk about somewhat hot topics that are happening and some other things. We're going to take it a notch up from that. So let's not just talk about what the hot topics are. Let's talk about how these issues even come about. How do MLS policy issues get to the National Association level? Well, there's several different MLS governing bodies. One is the Multiple Listing Issues and Policy Committee. That's a group of about 120 people representatives from all across the country. Each state has at least 2 representatives. There's some other at-large members as well. That group has a chair and a vice chair, and they meet twice a year at the 2 national meetings. So they're meeting at this national convention tomorrow, and they met earlier this year, which would have been in DC, but was in May. So that group, it's a big group. It's a lot of people, right? It's hard to do if you've ever done committee work, you know, it's hard to do wordsmithing or any type of deep dive into a particular issue or proposal when you have 120 people. So because of that challenge, the second group exists. And the second group is the MLS Technology and Emerging Issues Advisory Board. That group is a subset of the committee. So there's 120 people on the committee. There's around 20 something on the advisory board. That 20 something people, they get together twice a year, about a month and a half, 2 months in advance of the national meeting. So you're looking at March, April, or you're looking at August, September, meet in Chicago typically for a day and a half. And they do a deep dive. That's 20 people, very seasoned professionals, a pretty balanced makeup of brokers and MLS executives, but these are people who understand the MLS industry. And they bring to the table a whole set, a whole varied skill set, from technology to governance to you name it. These guys are the cream of the crop, really great representatives of the organization. And like I said, they do a deep dive. So different policy proposals will come to that advisory board, and that advisory board will beat it up, talk about it. It may carry over to a different meeting. And they try to get to a point where they're comfortable in whatever position it is they're taking, that they'll make a recommendation to the full committee, to that MLS committee. So if you notice the process there, what you have is you have the advisory board, the smaller group getting together, deep dive into whatever the proposal is, vetting it fully, making a recommendation to the full committee. Full committee then has an opportunity to discuss and debate whatever that recommendation is. But the anticipation is that since it came from the advisory board, they've kind of gotten into a point where it's in an acceptable format. It's just now you're debating the merits of the issue, right? The higher level merits of whatever the issue is. So that's the advisory board. And then there's several other groups here. The MLS Association Executive Session, that's a group that Renee staffs. Renee, you want to just talk a little bit about what that group, it's not an official NAR group, it's kind of a group outside of NAR, but talk a little bit about that group.
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. So the MLS Association Executive Session is geared towards providing educational content during our mid-year conference and our annual conference, so in May and in November. It's chaired, and so we have a chair and a vice chair. They're generally MLS executives, and they'll address any number of current topics based on either policy questions that we're having, or, for example, at this recent AE session, we talked about, we had a panel that talked about days on market coming soon and what those look like or should look like, either through national policy or local consideration. We have a number of guest speakers as well, from not just in the industry, but also from outside of the industry. And time is all running together. So at one of our prior sessions, we had a panel of folks from Arello. This was last year at our annual conference. We had a panel of Arello folks who are state licensed law officials. And as you know, they interact quite heavily with our industry and have implications on MLS and association membership and what licensees can and can't do. So we had a great discussion there, but super educational. Great topics, and we, of course, always invite you to attend, and not just you, but also any of your staff. These are great informational sessions for your staff that are in the weeds on either MLS or policy issues. Super helpful for them as well.
And that's a good point that Renee made. That's an open session, and that's a heavily attended session. You'll have hundreds of people at that meeting. The MLS committee, that's an open session too. And you'll have, when we were talking, if you were here back last November, we were talking about a policy called clear cooperation. A lot of interest around that. We had 1,000 people in the room for that, and overflow another 500 in a different room of people just listening to the conversation in the room with 1,000 people. The advisory board is a closed meeting. Again, that's 20 something people. And next on our list here, we have the MLS Forum. So the MLS Forum is different from the advisory board and from the committee and from the executive session in that it's not a policy-making group. It's more a grassroots discussion of what's important to the industry. Typically at the forum, there's some educational element, but it's really an opportunity for anybody who has an interest in MLS to raise an issue and have it discussed and have it see if it garners enough interest to bring it to the advisory board or to the committee, right? So open discussion, anyone has an opportunity to raise whatever it is that's happening in their local market to see if it's something that's happening in other areas too, and something that should be addressed on a more national basis. So the next group is the MLS Breakouts. The MLS Breakouts, a little different since we're in COVID and in lockdown. We didn't even have them at the last national meeting. We did have them this time, right, Renee? We did have them. Yep. And
Yes.
they're facilitated by our an alliance partner of ours called the Council of Multiple Listing Services. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. But Renee, you're kind of more connected with the MLS Breakouts. Why don't you talk a little bit about those and the relationship that we have with CMLS?
Absolutely. So the MLS breakouts are designed to put you together with MLS executives and AEs that come from similar size membership as you. And these are designed to help facilitate conversations either about policy issues that are being discussed by the committee and taken up by the board of directors, or just general industry discussions. Sometimes they're operational related. So for example, there might be a discussion about data licensing and compliance, and in the breakouts, we have them broken out by membership size, but then we further break them down into smaller groups so that we can have easier conversation amongst usually about a table of 10. There'll be facilitators on hand to give you an exercise on issues to talk through. They'll collect notes and kind of have a general discussion and provide some key takeaways. This time around, because of the virtual environment, our breakouts were not done by size. So we had everyone kind of mixed in together, and we had several breakouts where we went into and talked about policy concerns that are going to be addressed tomorrow at the MLS committee. And again, lots of great discussion there. Also, more importantly, I think a great opportunity to network with other AEs and MLS CEOs. You'll find that one of the interesting things for me as I'm out speaking to folks, or now virtually, is that sometimes you might think that an issue that you're seeing in your marketplace is unique to you or to you, the size of your association or MLS. But in speaking with MLS executives and AEs across the country from different regions and different sizes, you're going to find that they're facing the exact same issue. The only thing that changes is how folks either approach that particular issue or industry discussion. So it's super helpful to be able to network with other AEs and CEOs throughout the country.
Great point, Renee. And so if you see the structure of these, right, you have the committee kind of formal, they're a policy making group. Then you have the forum, less formal. Anybody has an opportunity to speak, but maybe you don't want to get up in front of a crowd, because the forum, we had our forum yesterday. We had the MLS Forum for this meeting, and there were close to 800 people on that. Now it's remote, so it's not as intimidating remotely. But in a physical setting, when we have the forum, there'll be 500, 600 people in the room. And maybe you're not comfortable, raising whatever the issue you have in front of a crowd of that size. I'd encourage you to do it because they want to hear from you, and they're very receptive to talking about different industry issues. But the breakouts then is a good alternative. It's a good opportunity for you to meet with like-sized MLSs, sit at a table with people that you think don't look scary, look friendly enough to talk to you, and work through your different issues. And like Renee said, you'll quickly realize that what you're dealing with in your local market isn't uncommon to what may be happening in other markets. So highly encourage you to take advantage of attending those sessions. The only one you wouldn't be able to attend would be the advisory board. So during a national meeting, when we're back to normal, put those on your list of sessions that you want to reach out to educate yourself and see what's happening in the MLS space. The last bullet item is work groups and presidential advisory groups. So what is a work group? What is a presidential advisory group? So they're not standing committees. These are groups that are brought about to identify or to work on a particular purpose, a particular goal, and make a recommendation or a report. With a work group, that would be to whatever the committee is that formed that work group. For the presidential advisory groups, that's to the president. So for a work group, we have one right now called the MLS Standards Work Group. We're going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But that group was impaneled by the Multiple Listing Issues and Policy Committee. And the purpose of that group is to look at standards for multiple listing service. What should brokers expect when they join an MLS? And it's a pretty high overarching purpose. And like I said, we'll talk more about that. But that group will then report back to the committee and actually has reported back to the advisory board, and will have several recommendations coming to the committee at tomorrow's meeting of the MLS committee. The presidential advisory group, there's been several that touch on MLS in the past. The latest one was in 2018, and they made a report to the president of NAR at the time. And the president can do a number of different things with the report from that group. He could say, thank you very much, and do nothing with it. Or he could say, this is great. This is good information. I'd love for us to, act on these issues and move it forward. On the 2008 Presidential Advisory Group, several things came out of that. One is NAR's messaging concerning consolidation of services and really trying to encourage and strengthen that. The creation of an MLS grant program for consolidation. Trying to think what else was from that. There were 4 main recommendations. Renee, you remember the other ones?
I'm cataloging through my mind.
Yeah.
We think to that. I just want to mention something and address the consolidation issue very quickly, because you'll hear this, right? Oftentimes, the perception is that consolidation means that NAR wants you to consolidate your entities. And nothing could be further from the truth. We recognize and realize that just as with most things, those are decisions best made locally. But rather, when you hear us talk about consolidation, yes, we want to provide the resources and the connections and the ability, if that is something that you and your membership want to explore. But more importantly, what was highlighted in the PAG report itself was the reason we look towards consolidation, we have that discussion about consolidation, is the access to data. That was an overarching theme in the PAG, and a lot of our discussions where really what many are getting at is members' desire to have expanded access to property data in order to work with their consumers. So whether that's through actual structural, physical consolidation, or a consolidation of data through data sharing, or participating in data sharing initiatives, the various ones that are out there. We use consolidation broadly as a general umbrella, but those discussions include anything and everything under that umbrella, not just physical consolidation.
That's a good point, Renee. And for those of you, it's really addressing your broker's needs and keying in on whether their markets are expanding and they need greater access. If you can leverage the strengths of a nearby MLS to somehow enter into a partnership with them, not necessarily to merge or anything like that, but to leverage their services and provide greater products and services to your brokerage community. So there are resources on nar.realtor about consolidation. And if you haven't looked at it, take a look at that. There's some good information out there. So that in a nutshell are the governing bodies for NAR's MLS. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to see, does anybody have any questions, comments with regard to this? Are you all still with us? I see some moving, so I know we're not frozen. That's good. All right, I got no comments in the chat either, so you're either multitasking and playing Minesweep or something, or Renee and I are hitting it and conveying exactly what we should in the session. So I hope it's the latter. We'll jump to the next screen. So industry alliances. So we talked about how proposals get to the MLS advisory group, right? We talked about that they get proposals. Well, where do those come from, right? And the funny thing is I just thought the very first industry alliance should be our brokerage community and our MLS executives, right? That we at a national level receive correspondence concerning different issues that are happening in the marketplace. And it may come about through the MLS Forum, or it may come about from a correspondence to NAR. Some of you may be familiar, maybe not, with a policy initiative at NAR called MLS of Choice, where it knocked down barriers for licensees to choose which MLS they wanted to participate in. And there couldn't be we skipped back. So that came from one broker in Florida who was frustrated with overlapping markets in his area. And when the MLS leadership and the committee looked into it more, it was a common issue throughout the country. And that really was a movement that started from one broker, one smaller broker, that turned into a national initiative called MLS of Choice. So like I said, our industry alliances, our partners, are the brokerage community. They're the MLS executives. Renee is out with outreach to different groups, soliciting feedback and talking about how things are doing. And we're bringing that back to our MLS leadership and the committee and sharing what's taken place. We also have more formal relationships, like with RESO, Real Estate Standards Organization. This is the group that is creating the pathway. It's like the Rosetta Stone for MLS data is the best way to think of it. If you've not looked up RESO, they have a website and they have two major initiatives. One's called the Data Dictionary and the other one's called Web API. Data Dictionary is making sure that MLSs talk the same language to one another, that vendors and software providers, that they're able to use data without having to create platforms and things that translate that information, that everybody's speaking the same language. And it's a real initiative that policy was created back 4 years ago, that every MLS should be Data Dictionary compliant and should be providing MLS through a web API. So if you're not familiar with that, there are two great videos on RESO's website that explain what those initiatives are. I'll put it in real simple terms for you. And they have a great CEO in Sam DeBoer that if you have any questions, Sam would be more than willing to talk to you. And they have a bunch of different work groups and ways to get involved on that side of it if you really want to get down into it. Renee, why don't you take CMLS?
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. Before I jump into CMLS, another example of the day-to-day, the use case for RESO and the data dictionary and web API discussions, as is the case with any MLS, you'll have an occasion where membership will request the addition of a new pick list option or a new field to address something related to property listings. Another way to describe RESO is say that I run an MLS and Rodney does too in the other side of the country. And you're all both of our customers, right? Both of our members. And I call my active listings simply active. And in the absence of RESO, Rodney would call his listings for sale. And what will happen in that regard is if you ask for a data feed, you'll see mismatch of data fields or options. And now you're left having to reconcile or figure out what each of our terms mean in each of our MLSs. As you can imagine, for members, that means that they have to figure out not only the mapping and the practical implications of that, having to work with vendors to try to reconcile the differences, but also attaching meanings and definitions to those that ultimately translate into having to describe and explain these things to their clients. So if you are posed with a question or request to add a field, always a great idea to start with the data dictionary over at RESO. It's available on their website. They may already have a field. They may already have an enumeration, which is a fancy way of saying an option or a pick list option for a specific field that you're adding. And if their data dictionary doesn't address it, then you still have the flexibility to add a specific local custom field, specific to your market area. But that's always a great starting point. It helps with discussions with members if you have committees that are looking for new data options to address other issues. Moving over to the Council Multiple Listing Services. So I think I placed the link to that in the chat earlier. I'll drop it here again one more time.
No,
The
I see it.
Council
It's still there.
Oh, is it? Perfect.
Yeah.
The Council Multiple Listing Services is the trade organization for multiple listing services in the country. Their membership consists of about 250-ish, I believe, MLSs. Roughly, I may have gone a little high on that. So as you know, we have about 600 realtor-owned MLSs, and CMLS represents about 250 of those. And they also represent independent, so broker-owned and operated MLSs. They provide a number of resources, which I'll link in the chat here in just a second. They have work groups that are put together to put together best practices, anything from data licensing to customer service to compliance. They also have a legal section. So the lawyers that you work with, they may already belong to the Council Multiple Listing Services. It's a great place for them to not only network, but also address specific issues that are legal issues that are facing the MLS. They have an annual conference as well. It's probably one of the, ours first, RESO and CMLS are all great conferences to attend and network, but also receive lots of education behind MLS operations. They've also recently started to make a push to get more involved in national policy. And the way they approach that is an issue is brought up to them and they'll convene a work group. So MLS executives and others in the industry that come together, kick around that specific issue, put together a proposal and provide some supporting training material behind that, best practice guides, implementation guides. Rodney and I had the opportunity to work with CMLS recently to put together an implementation guide for the participant data access policy. This is a policy that was proposed by CMLS, was passed and approved NAR that requires MLSs to provide a data feed back to participants with all of their own data. And so CMLS thought that it would be helpful to put together an implementation guide for the industry, and Rodney, myself, and several others participated in that. And I'll also link to a place where you can get those resources. So they're membership run organization. So I would invite you to take a look at them. Lots of great resources and support there as well for you.
Renee, I think you're best to talk about RPR.
Sure. So I'll put those links after RPR. RPR, you may already be familiar with them. RPR provides a platform that enables your members to work with, it enhances your MLS data. It allows them to work not only with your residential data sets, but also commercial data sets. They provide additional market insight reports and other marketing materials that they can turn around and use with consumers. Especially those that are wanting to cross over into the commercial space. On the commercial front, I'll start there. RPR is also consuming, you may have seen a recent push to provide some MLS listing platforms to members. So there's about 3 options now that members can use. They receive a discount that was obtained through NAR to use those platforms so that they can list commercial properties. However, if you have members that might not necessarily need to list yet, but they want to see what's available in the marketplace, those commercial listing platforms are flowing their data back into RPR, and members have access to that at no additional charge. So that's part of their membership, and they can pull up that listing information, create flyers, create reports, and provide those out to consumers. It's a closed platform only available to realtors. So there's some great tools and resources that are provided by RPR that are made available to membership. On the residential front, same thing. They can put together CMAs, flyers, neighborhood reports. They can put together some of the cool reports as well are things that you might be able to work with. For those of you that are working with elected officials locally, both members and you can put together economic reports or market level reports that can help inform discussions in the community, not just for consumers looking to buy and sell in those areas, but also in your work with elected officials and other civic organizations as you're looking at either development opportunities or other ways to get your association and MLS involved in the marketplace. They provide quite a number of webinars as well. So if you're looking to provide members with additional training resources, RPR has staff trainers, and they also certify members and association staff as RPR trainers. so that you can help expand the offerings to your local marketplace. So I'll link to those. They have regular training throughout the month that you can attend and take advantage of. And they have a great crew as well. If you are in an area that's interested, maybe you're not necessarily full on doing native data sharing just yet, but you have an interest in giving members the ability to view listing data from other marketplaces. A number of MLSs are participating through RPR View through their platform, which is members can log into RPR View and view listing information from other market areas, other MLSs that may be relevant and important to them. So you have the ability to opt into that, and RPR can get you set up and up and running on that side. So I'll put a link to those in the chat to CMLS and RPR. Lots of great resources on both those websites.
Great update, Renee. The one thing that I'll add to RPR is what I hear from brokers most often is just how surprised they are at the reporting and the tools and the products that are available through RPR at no cost. That if you want to look like a rock star to your brokerage community, point them to those tools so that they can use them in working with their clients and customers. Great information out there. Next on the list is Realtor.com. Realtor.com is NAR's namesake, obviously, and it's an aggregation site for property information owned by News Corp, but still, I would say, safe to say it's our preferred aggregation site, national aggregation site where brokers can post information on NAR.com. I believe it's still a no-cost option for national exposure, and there are added features that your brokers can buy into with regard to that exposure. So Realtor.com. And then last, Arello. Renee, why don't you take that as well? You're muted. Gotcha.
Rookie mistake. So I mentioned Arello earlier. Arello is the Association of Real Estate Licensed Law Officials. These are your real estate commissioners and others that are part of the state licensing authorities. They have an organization. Charlie Lee, who's an attorney on staff here at NAR and part of the extended MLS team, is our liaison to Arello. And they also meet during our annual conference. So I believe their meeting is on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. So you can find that information on the agenda. And super helpful to at least take a look at their website or attend the meetings, if assuming it's an open meeting, I believe it is. Super great discussions there. They address, as we were having, for example, discussions about clear cooperation policy. Last year, they raised some concerns and some issues about what is being represented by licensees and licensees' duties, not just under our rules and policies, right, but also under state license law and those considerations that occur there. So great to establish a relationship with those folks in your state. They can provide some insight that would have operational implications on your MLS. In particular, anything that's consumer facing or consumer impacting. That's an area that licensed law officials are typically very interested in, wanting to ensure that the right information is presented to consumers and it's compliant with their state regulations. Great folks. We had them on a panel at the MLS AE session, and we'll likely have them again at a future session, but great group to network with as well. And I'll drop a link to them in the chat here shortly. Rodney, I think it rubbed off. You're muted now.
And I normally don't mute myself. I was on the conference website looking to see if I could find the Arello session. I didn't see it there. So I don't know if it's either a closed session or if it's maybe not under governance. I'm not sure. But there's the link for Arello itself that Renee just shared. So that are our industry partners alliances. They are the groups that help bring forward issues related to policy and work with us for different initiatives in the MLS space. Next on our group, let's stop there for a second. Anybody have any questions, comments about the industry partners or anything we've spoken about so far? There's Nobu. Hey, Nobu.
I think Nobu could teach this session.
Look at that. He probably could. He's going to critique us. All right. So next we're talking about hot topics during the convention. The committee itself has three areas that you should be aware of. If you attended the MLS Forum, you already got a sneak peek into what each of these is about. Renee, I'll take the first one. You take listing addresses, and then we can share the logo. So MLS Standards Work Group, I talked about the fact that there's an MLS Standards Work Group that was impaneled. It was impaneled late last year. They had ideas prior to the pandemic of getting together and taking a deep dive into the initiative of standards. For those of you who've been in the organization for a while, this is kind of akin to core standards for associations. Core standards is a bar that every association has to meet. I'm sure you've heard talk about it. There's some changes to it coming out of this national meeting. But when that took place several years ago, the logical discussion after that was, okay, well, next let's do MLSs. And I can tell you that wasn't initially embraced. But as the advisory board and other groups kept talking through different MLS issues, it came back up. And at the advisory board meeting last year at this time, they approved a group to explore the idea of standards, not necessarily create them, but explore the idea to see if there was any validity to the benefits of it, and if we should pursue that. So it's a small group of about 15 people, evenly broken up between brokers and MLS executives. There's a conscious effort to have a strong representation from smaller MLSs, since they may have the greatest impact of any standards in having to make changes or address issues. And when the group first started talking, I can tell you there's a lot of false starts, because it was more than a 10,000 foot look at what is it that the MLS industry needs when you talk about standards. And they needed actually to take a big step back. And the group ended up doing several group exercises over a month. They would meet every week, by the way, for an hour and a half every week to discuss standards. And they did several group exercises where they just blew up the whole industry and said, okay, if nothing existed today, what would it gravitate towards? What would be who would be the stakeholders? What would be their needs in real estate? And what needs would be satisfied by the MLS, or should be satisfied by the MLS? It's not surprising to say it, but I can tell you it's not something that the group initially went to when they first started talking about this. And that was, it's all about the data. MLS is all about the data, that any type of standards that should be created should focus around the importance of getting the most accurate and most complete data, because that's what our stakeholders need. And that's where the MLS has the greatest impact in satisfying those needs. So they broke up their work into 4 groups: compliance, data, governance, and service. Compliance, data, governance, and service. They also broke up their work. They wanted to finish and have a final report for this national meeting, but quickly realized that it was a bigger task than they initially thought. And I'm not lying, they met every week, an hour and a half. So they broke their work up into two phases. This first phase brought forward 8 recommendations that were supported by the advisory group and that are moving forward to the committee tomorrow. Second phase is soliciting feedback on potential standards that the group is discussing, and several other additional considerations that they have. There's a website that's being developed, and we're going to push all that information out, and there's going to be an opportunity for people to provide input on the discussions and the direction of this group, so it can be shared with the advisory group, the work group, as they continue their discussions. The anticipation is that they will have a set of standards that will go forward next spring, and as part of those standards, there'll be some type of enforcement process. The group did come to the conclusion that standards are important, that there should be standards. They've identified at least 3 or 4 different areas under those 4 categories. So you'll see more on that, and there'll be information pushed out about that group and their discussions. For the first phase and the 8 recommendations, Renee, did you post the link to the, Renee posted a link to the committee's audience agenda. That audience agenda includes those 8 recommendations. So you can look and get a good sense of what the direction is coming from the work group. These initial recommendations are standalone policy changes. The group, these aren't standards, but they are policy changes that the group felt very strongly about that every MLS should be complying with outside of standards. 4 of them deal with compliance issues. And I can tell you the foundational thinking behind that is you need your participants, you need your subscribers complying with the rules and regulations, because it's the best way to ensure that you're getting the most accurate and most complete data. That there is a train of thought out there that violations of the rules that work to a benefit of a broker might just be a cost of doing business, and the group's trying to address that through different policy changes. They also want to see more standardization, more consistency in sanctioning guidelines. So recommendation 1 deals with that. They want more accountability of a broker and the oversight that the broker has for their licensee. And then there's some other issues that deal with RISO standards that we talked about, and ensuring that the web API has the same amount of information as any other data feed coming from the MLS. There's also a policy change about accuracy of information and enforcing that. And then the funniest one, I think, is there's a policy statement about providing contact information for the MLS for technical and customer service, because in a number of cases that's very hard to find, whether you're a vendor or somebody else looking to talk with someone from the MLS about your particular needs. So the last one is a recommendation concerning fair housing, and in the environment that we're in, how important that is, and such a central role that the MLS plays in ensuring fair housing, and that we can do a little better in making sure that every MLS has a process in place to monitor, to identify potential fair housing issues so that they can be brought to the attention of the listing broker and rectified. So those are the 8 recommendations that are coming out of the work group, and some background just on the work group itself. You'll hear more from this group moving forward, and we'll look forward to that report in spring of next year with the final set of standards. Renee, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rodney. So in the material that I linked in the chat, you'll find within the agenda, on page 2 of the agenda, there's an additional recommendation for residential listing addresses in the MLS. Earlier this year, NAR was contacted by an MLS that wanted to create a private listing or privacy listing status for listings that would be input into the service. And because of a safety or privacy concern, the seller did not want to fully create an office exclusive listing, but also didn't want to fully share all of their listing information in the service. So in response to that, the MLS wanted to create a status that would allow members to submit listings to the service without requiring an address to be filed. At that time, we responded that the address is an integral part of what a listing is, and it should be filed with the service. But because our policy doesn't address whether or not that address needs to be disseminated to participants and subscribers, that's where we left it at that time. Shortly after that, another MLS raised the same issue, but they wanted to specifically receive guidance on whether or not what they were doing, which was similar, creating a private listing or privacy listing, whether or not they would be within policy if they withheld an address from participants and subscribers. And again, the rationale there from that MLS was that because they were in a luxury market environment, there were concerns from celebrity clients that if they were to share their address on the MLS, that they would, be faced with paparazzi and others simply wanting to go to the property because it was for sale. They did not want to do an office exclusive listing. And in response to the clear cooperation policy, the MLS wanted to encourage those listings to be in the MLS. So they thought that simply withholding an address would meet all those goals. For that particular MLS, their process was that they would share some limited property characteristics, so bedroom count, bathroom square footage, and maybe a general indication of what area or neighborhood the property was in, but nothing much more specific. Rather, a cooperating broker would need to reach out to the listing broker, let them know that they have a client that this property may or may not be a match for just based on property characteristics. They would need to provide information about their buyers so that the listing broker could then vet them, provide some level of vetting of the buyer to make sure that they were a legitimate buyer. In one MLS, or at least in one MLS, that vetting includes a process where, say Nobu was my buyer. I would have to submit Nobu's information to the listing broker. The listing broker would then go to Google, research Nobu to see if Nobu had a high enough Google profile on one instance. And then on another, they would ask for some of the other things that's a little more normal to transactions, which is, are they pre-approved? Do they have financing? Do they have proof of funds for this type of offer, et cetera? So there were varying degrees of vetting of the buyer. But even then, in one of the MLSs, there was a possibility that the buyer's broker would be required to enter into a non-disclosure agreement before obtaining that address. As you can imagine, there was concerns raised on the other side, and there was strong feelings from proponents of this handling that it would meet the goals of getting listing information in the service while being responsive to a seller's privacy and safety concerns. The issue, because we don't have a specific requirement within national policy that an address be disseminated to participants and subscribers, the issue was brought forth to NAR's MLS Tech and Emerging Issues Advisory Board. After much discussion and considerations on both sides of the issue, the advisory board advanced a policy proposal to require the filing of an address and immediate dissemination to participants and subscribers within the service. So you have the language there, which says that where an address exists, and that's important because there has to be an address that exists, right? This wouldn't reach new subdivisions where an address hasn't yet been assigned. So in that case, you might have a parcel number or some other identifying information. So this addresses listings that have an address, must be included with any residential listing filed with the MLS and be immediately displayed to other MLS participants and subscribers. This would be a mandatory policy, again, impacting residential properties that have an address assigned to it. This would not upend or remove any other existing policy provisions that provide a mechanism for sellers to address those privacy concerns of not wanting to share listing information on the internet. As you all know, the best way to look at this is the MLS is really two things. First and foremost, it's a broker cooperative. So it's the closed member platform where listing information is shared within the service. And then it's also the mechanism to publish listing information to the world. It's that gateway to public marketing, where you hit the button and the listing goes out to the internet, syndication sites, and other marketing venues. So within existing policy, whether or not this policy proposal passes, members still have an ability to offer to their sellers, especially those that have a privacy or safety concern, if an office exclusive is not right for them, they can still share that listing with other participants within the closed MLS platform and receive an instruction to withhold either the entire property or just the property's address from going out to the internet, to internet display, from disseminating outside of the MLS platform. So that still remains a viable option and something that's provided for within policy. So this policy will be considered tomorrow. There's, again, we received feedback from both sides of the issue. Some say that this should be a local issue, up to each and every local MLS to decide for themselves. And others feel that this would have other wide-ranging impacts. So for example, and current policy says that if you make listing information available in any data feed, it also has to be made available to members for use on AVMs, or automated valuation models. You can imagine that allowing for listings where no address is included with that property to be made available in an AVM feed may essentially render that usage or that use case non-usable. I can't imagine a scenario where someone would be able to put together an AVM without knowing a property's location. All you essentially would have is bedroom count, bathroom count, square footage, maybe some pricing information. So there's one implication there. The other is there have been some questions or concerns raised about fair housing. as to how members of the public can be properly informed about what listing information is out there and where these listings are located. As you know, listing information is pushed out to clients via the client gateways or client portals on your MLS platform through client reports. And so sending that information out to consumers via those mechanisms without an address may not necessarily be helpful to them in that they have no indication of where this property is located. So again, it might not fully expose listing information to them. But again, the other side is how do we address those privacy and safety concerns that sellers have? So it'll be a good discussion tomorrow. We invite you to listen in. You can access the committee information through the agenda and the meeting material and that discussion will occur tomorrow. Now for the MLS logo, I'll turn that back over to Rodney as I advance the slide here. There we go.
Look, I caught myself being muted before I said too much. So logo. So many, you might not even be aware we have an MLS logo, but we do. The MLS logo was initially created back in the 1970s. I don't think it's changed much since then. NAR recently updated its branding guidelines in March of 2020 this year. So they adjusted a lot of NAR's primary and secondary logos and trademarks. And that really opened up the opportunity to look at the NAR MLS logo and modernize it. So what you have on the top left is the old logo, kind of a layering scheme. And what you have down below is the new MLS logo that was designed by NAR's in-house studio. So no cost in developing that. This will be updated in NAR's MLS Handbook. And for any of your brokers who want to use it, we're hoping they will. We hope that this re-energizes the thought of promoting a broker and licensee's participation and subscription to realtor-owned and operated MLS, and that it's a soft transition. So there's no hard and fast date when everybody's got to switch over. If your brokers and licensees have old business cards or signs or anything like that that uses the old logo, they can keep that information. And when the opportunity arises, they should switch over to the new logo. Support materials and guidelines for using the new logo will be available shortly after the NAR convention. And we hope you like it. So far, the reception to it has been very positive. So that's the logo. The next thing we're talking about, resources. So we threw a lot at you, right? We talked about policy, we talked about the groups, we talked about our alliances, we talked about the topics that are coming up at the convention. All good information, right? But if you want to learn more outside of this session, and you want to keep abreast of what's happening in the MLS space, we have great resources on nar.realtor. Renee conducts, and I'm part of with our cohort, Charlie Lee, an MLS Hour that gets together every now and then. We do webinars on different MLS topics, stuff that's coming to the committee, stuff that just may be out in the marketplace and raised as issues, but good opportunities there to talk about industry issues. And you'll find those on nar.realtor. We also have a hub community. The hub community is, there's a group out there, the Open MLS Discussion. Anyone can sign up for it. If you want to get updates on what's happening in the MLS space, it's a great place to subscribe to and get information and share what's taking place in your market. Renee, anything you want to add to those, and you want to go ahead and talk about the others?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to point out on the hub, for those of you that haven't accessed the hub, or if you have, I would just point out that there's a MLS Open forum where we'll post, and because we're in the middle of conference, we're going to be posting some follow-up discussions that occurred at the forum and the committee, but throughout the year. Again, that's a good place to bring forth discussion and questions for other MLS executives and AEs on any number of issues that you're encountering. It's a great place to have discussion. You can always reach out to myself, Rodney, or anyone on the MLS policy team, but it's also helpful sometimes to crowdsource responses on some of the issues that you're faced with in your local market. You'll find that others are likely facing the same questions or concerns in other parts of the country. The policy handbook, we keep going back to that. It's a great place to start, especially for your staff that's tasked with enforcing rules or applying policy locally. Virtually, it's funny, myself and Rodney, well, that's typically the first thing that we do when we receive a question. We'll pop open the Policy Handbook. Rodney has his, I think it's on his right side of his desk or somewhere. Mine's off to my right down here. So we actually have the hard copy of our Policy Handbook that we pull out and have these discussions. But it's always a great place to start. Some good reading if you're having a hard time falling asleep too. Just crack open the Policy Handbook, and maybe after a policy or two, you'll be out, guaranteed. But again, always reach out to us on any questions that you might have there. And let me exit the presentation here so we can go through and take a look at some questions in the last couple of minutes that we have. Okay. I'll go through, there's two issues that were sent to me in the chat. I'll bring up very quickly here as we get close to wrapping up. Rodney, I'll ask this question of you of MLS policy, and I think this is a membership question. Is realtor membership required in order to have MLS access?
Great
Renee,
question.
just one quick thing. Did you pause the recording, or do you want to get the questions on the recording? I don't see the recording going.
Recording's on still. Do you want me to pause it or?
No, mine says paused. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. You're good. Go ahead.
We're good. So great question. And as a new AE, I can understand that question, right? Because there's likely some potential confusion around it. There are areas of the country where realtor membership is not a prerequisite for participation. The 11th district, Florida, Georgia, Alabama, in California, you have a different court, and these are all based on court cases. So if you're a broker in California, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, you don't have to be a realtor to get MLS, even if it's a realtor owned and operated MLS. Everywhere else in the country, you can still require it, but it's your local decision as to whether you're going to require it or not. NAR will still defend you if there is any cases that are brought up to try and challenge the requirement. And I can tell you that most MLSs in those areas outside of the states I've mentioned still require it as a prerequisite. Now, there is a distinction between the principal broker, who's referred to as the participant, and any licensee affiliated with that principal, who's typically referred to as the subscriber, right? Participant and subscriber. The requirement of being a realtor is applied to participants. When you talk about individuals who are affiliated with a realtor, there's no requirement that they be realtors, or affiliated with a principal broker. There's no requirement that they be a realtor. So even if you locally have the prerequisite of you have to be a realtor to participate, don't mistake that to mean that the licensees affiliated with that individual also have to be realtors. Their access to MLS is actually provided because of their affiliation, and you can't impose the added requirement of them to be a realtor. So great question. Hopefully that answers it. If you have any follow-up, let me know.
Thank you. So there's two other questions. And then if you have any remaining thoughts, questions, anything that you'd like us to address, please feel free to send that into the chat. We'll address those before we turn it back over to Crystal. I know we're getting short on time. Two other issues. The first one, just because it just came in, clear cooperation policy question. You might see that in the chat. So some members in my MLS are also members of others. Does this mean that this member must put all their listings on each MLS because they have all adopted the clear cooperation question? Great question. This is one of those things where the clear cooperation policy is very narrow and limited in scope. But what it does do a good job of is placing other policies into the spotlight. This is actually a listing procedures question, or a mandatory submission question. And that's always the starting point. The starting point is, does your member of your MLS have an exclusively listed property within the service area of your MLS? And is it the property of a type that's enumerated within your service that's required for submission? If the answer to all of those is yes, then it must be submitted to each of those services that the MLS, that the member is a member of, where the answer is yes to all those questions. So what that means is, if I'm a member in Jamie's MLS and also in Nobu's MLS, and their service areas overlap, and my listing is of the type that's required for mandatory submission in each of their services, yes, I must submit the listing to each of those service areas, or those of each of those MLSs. If the service areas don't overlap, or if, say, I'm listing residential condo and Nobu specifically excludes residential condos from submission in his MLS, then I'm not required to submit it. So this is a mandatory submission question rather than a clear cooperation policy question. Membership only is not the controlling factor on whether or not that listing needs to be submitted. You would need to look at your mandatory submission policy to answer that first. So think of it as a flow chart. Is the listing within my service area? And is it of the type that needs to be delivered to my MLS? And if it is, then it must be submitted. And of course, it must also comply with clear cooperation policy secondarily.
And I'll add to that too, because I've gotten questions, right? When clear cooperation came about, I think everybody looked through the lens of clear cooperation. And like Renee said, it's a very, very narrow focused policy. And it's as if all the other policies that have been in place for decades are overshadowed by clear cooperation. One, you got to be a member of the MLS. I've had individuals ask the question of whether, well, the listings in my MLS's area, do I have to submit it to the MLS? Well, the person wasn't a participant of that MLS. So one, the listing brokers are participant of your MLS. Two, it's of a property type that's required submission. Three, it's in the service area. And clear cooperation kicks in after all of that. If it's not in the MLS already, in other words, it's taken as an exempted listing or an office exclusive listing, and then it's publicly marketed. It's put in some limited capacity in the marketplace that it has to at that point be put into the MLS.
Thank you, Rodney. The other question that came in was about MLS consolidation. I addressed it earlier where I mentioned that NAR does not place a mandate on you and doesn't require you to consolidate. You may be, this is something that we hadn't, that being said, we have seen an increase in consolidation activity, structural consolidation throughout the years. At one point, we were at around 1,000 MLSs. We're down to right around 600 now. And it's a trend that's driven by your membership. And with guidance from you running the MLS and the association, this has to be a member question. This is something that's best addressed by you locally. We can't answer that for you. We can provide resources and some guidance if that's the route you decide to go, but there is no mandate from NAR that you must consolidate. I would imagine that many of you will at some point be approached by an MLS that's interested in consolidating or data sharing or any other numbers of collaboration that are occurring in the marketplace. MLS Grid, MLS Aligned, where they're collaborating on providing one single source of data distribution to help enable adoption of web API and facilitate data licensing. All those are decisions made by you and your membership. You have to decide what's best for your members as they're servicing consumers, and keeping in mind that there's a growing demand from consumers to have greater access to data. The one thing that we need to keep in mind that I will say, coming from the MLS world, the data is out there, right? I recently went through a home buying experience myself through the pandemic. I was staying in Southern California, looking at property across 2 different states. And the pain point for me, as you would imagine any consumer has, is it was very difficult for me in actually 2 particular market areas. The area where I was looking for a property is serviced by overlapping MLSs. So it's very difficult for me to work with just one realtor member in order to get that listing information. And you can imagine as a consumer, there's some frustrations and some pain points there. So those are discussions best advanced by your members. We have consolidation resources on our website. And again, I'm using consolidation resources broadly, which is to say not just structural consolidation, could be data sharing, could be any of the other service initiatives, collaboration initiatives in the industry. Will certainly be available to you as a resource, and we can help answer questions, but we won't, Rodney's not going to tell you that you need to consolidate or you need to go down a specific route. That's not a question that we can answer.
And then Crystal's given us the hook here, but we got 2 other questions that I think we can quickly answer. I'll try to quickly answer. What if a builder has properties for sale, there's no listing? How does clear cooperation affect that? Again, it goes back to the foundational policies. Section 1 is actually the section in the model rules that requires an exclusive listing contract of a property type within the MLS's service area for it to be required to be filed with the service. If there's no listing, there's nothing to be filed. Clear cooperation is not applicable. And then the other thing is, well, what about clear cooperation? Everything goes back to clear cooperation, Renee. Did you ever notice this? Whenever we're talking, it all careens into clear cooperation. Clear cooperation, what if somebody, you have brokers taking listings on Friday and they don't have to file it till Monday? So that's not really a clear cooperation issue, although the time frame runs akin to clear cooperation. Your brokers, and I can't stress this enough, that it's not a given that every listing should be kept out of the MLS. It is not a given that every listing should be exempt or kept out of the MLS until it is publicly marketed. That is a specific policy and a specific directive from clear cooperation. The overarching requirement in the MLS rules and regulations is that listings will be filed with the service once all the signatures on the listing contract are signed. And each MLS determines what the time frame is for having to file those listings, whether it's 24, 48 hours or something more. That's what your brokers should be following. If they talk with their clients and it's determined through conversations with their clients that there are reasons to exempt the listing from the MLS, that there are privacy concerns, that there is something else, celebrity status, illness, divorce in the family, some other personal issues that they would want to keep it out of the marketplace and not distribute it to other MLS participants, then the broker should have that conversation, make that determination with their client, exempt it from the MLS based on that directive because it's in the client's best interest. But your brokerage community, and you should inform them, shouldn't immediately go to we're going to exempt it off of MLS because the broker wants, because this is what it looks like, the broker wants to take some advantage over trying to market it in-house before they have to put it on the market. They have a duty under Article 1 to act in their client's best interest. And it's arguable whether that's in their client's best interest to do so. So I would have those hard conversations with maybe not hard conversations, but I would educate your brokerage community over that issue and the importance of it. The challenging thing is low inventory, right? We all know it. Every market has low inventory. Every market has fierce competition, and the brokers know they're going to sell these listings regardless of these different marketing strategies. I long for the day when we get back to a normal market, and maybe some of this will be pushed to the wayside. But until then, they still have to have that conversation. They still have to make that determination. Otherwise, they run the risk of violating Article 1. And not only Article 1, they run the risk of violating their fiduciary duty to their client under license law. So I would advise them that they shouldn't take those steps, even if they think that it somehow assists their client, because it's questionable.